Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 3, Drunk in Wild Songs. Chapter 223, Tide. The gears turned rapidly in Qizuyan's mind in that instant as she weighed up the relative importance of both sides. She had to find the most suitable ally for Qidong in this tussle for power. The victory and defeat of this game were equally important to Qidong. It even determined just how long Qizuyan could remain in the commander-in-chief position in the future. Qizuyan made up her mind and said, "This humble subject has yet to have an in-depth discussion with the various excellencies from the Ministry of War and Ministry of Revenue, so I'm not familiar with the reserve situation in the various regions' granaries. However, the harvest in the 4 commanderies of Qidong last year was decent. So if the troops are mobilized, we can manage with some difficulty to hang on for 2 months assuming we consolidate the grains from the other granaries. You are a general, naturally, you understand it more than I do that it takes a month just to advance the troops if you want to continue penetrating deeper into the desert." The Empress Dowager spoke softly. "It's already the 3rd month now. If you hold up the spring plowing of the 4 commanderies but still fail to return after 2 months, then you will end up delaying the autumn harvest in the 7th month. Zuyan, it's not that I'm unwilling to mobilize troops, but that I can't." Qizuyan seemed to be stumped, and once again, silence descended upon Mingli Hall. The Empress Dowager rose to her feet slowly and held her sleeves together as she looked at the various ministers in the hall and advised in all earnestness. "Were the great Zhou's granaries in full abundance, I'd have fought this battle even if Zuyan didn't ask to. But the imperial court is hard-pressed for money at present and is really in no position to fight a war. Besides, food is the #1 necessity of the people. Fight this war, and the commoners of 3 regions will have to go hungry. Isn't that getting our priorities all wrong? Baran, you saw the Ministry of Revenue's report at the beginning of the year, and you understand the situations in the various areas like the back of your hand. With Qizuyan in the hall, how would the court ministers dare to speak frankly and refute her?" The Empress Dowager was so calm and composed as she forced them to bring up the 8 cities. Kong Qiu stood at the side, clutching his own memorial without so much as an expression. After a moment, Kong Qiu said, "Qidong's mobilization of troops is no small matter. There should have been a specific procedure in place. Commander-in-Chief Qi has just entered the capital. Since she has yet to discuss in detail with the Grand Secretariat, why not wait for us to finish the discussion tonight before making a decision?" By this, Kong Qiu was stalling for time without going along with the Empress Dowager or making a decision for Shueziaozuo. He had transcribed a copy of the account book Liang Qiushan had straightened out. It was truly a pity to have it in hand, yet still be unable to take down Dan City. After the court session was dismissed, everyone stepped out of Mingli Hall in successive order. Feng Quan stood in front to drape the overcoat over Li Jianting, who slowed down a few steps to wait for Kong Qiu to emerge. Kong Ling raised an arm to guide the way for Li Jianting. He led the heir apparent down the stairs and into that open and spacious area. "Your Highness pulled no punches today," Kong Qiu said. "The suggestion to consolidate the various areas' granaries is indeed an option." Li Jianting pursed her lips a little before smiling as she said to Kong Qiu, "The senior Grand Secretary spoke to me about it a little at the start of the year. Naturally, I wouldn't dare to forget about it. It just seems to be too tough to gather sufficient military grains at present." The day had already broken. Water puddles on the ground invertedly reflected the blue dome of heaven, while the upturned eaves covered up that last dim light of the night. Li Jianting took a few steps and said, "His Excellency Changshen is truly outstanding. I heard his mental arithmetic is both fast and accurate, and there would never be a mistake with the accounts that pass through his eyes. Since Dan City's field taxes case is temporarily deferred, why doesn't the senior Grand Secretary ask him to calculate the various areas' surplus grains? If the 3 areas aren't enough, there are still the 8 cities. Let everyone work as one." Kong Qiu said with a bitter smile, "The requisition of military grains now has to come from Juexi, and the quandary right now is broaching the subject of borrowing grains from the 8 cities. Kong Qiu suddenly stopped talking and turned his head aside to look intently at Li Jianting. What Li Jianting said was to get the Grand Secretariat to calculate, not to get the Grand Secretariat to investigate, and yet there was a whole world of difference in the meaning of this one word. Whether or not the Empress Dowager agreed to the former, the Grand Secretariat could get Liang Qiushan to do account of the 8 cities' surplus grains. As the Dan city's accounts were problematic, and Pan Lin was still locked up in prison, the Ministry of Revenue now ought to do a recount of the 8 cities' surplus grains. This was the duty of the Ministry of Revenue, and they were not wrong to do so. The Huadian between Li Jianting's brows was brilliantly red, and yet it did not detract from the heir apparent's spirited demeanor. She seemed to have just mentioned it in passing, even looking to be a little at a loss under Kong Qiu's gaze. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. As soon as Qi Zuyan stepped out of the palace gates, she saw Xue Zaiozhuo standing a short distance away. She pulled the overcoat off her shoulders and tossed it to Qi Wei, who had come over to receive her. Then she pointed ahead to Xue Zaiozhuo as an indication to talk as they walked. I heard from Minister Chen earlier that you were the one who shouldered the military salaries this time, Qi Zuyan said. Thanks a lot. Naturally, Qi Zuyan's word of thanks was not so simple. Xue Zaiozhuo heard the intent behind it and walked for a while with Qi Zuyan before saying, Commander-in-Chief Qi is mobilizing troops to keep Amuer in check. The war in the north is at a critical stage. This war ought to be fought. Steering clear of the fact that she already had military provisions, Qi Zuyan said, before I enter the capital, I heard that the military provisions this time have to be requisitioned from Juexi. Zhang Qingshan won't agree to it, will he? You people have your own difficulties, too. The mornings in Chu capital were no longer that cold, and the vendors on the streets started bustling around. As both of them were wearing official robes, no one around them dared to approach. The common folks all kept their distance. Once the pair of them walked past, they looked at Qi Zuyan again and whispered among themselves. The wind guiding the scorching plain, Qi Zuyan of the legends was merely tall and lanky. She did not have a Herculean physique, nor was she majestically imposing, but she had a certain calm and composure that could stand up to these prying and speculations. But you are right. This battle ought to be fought. The Wuzhu ornament Qi Zuyan was adorned with swung in the wind, and the slightly messy hair at her temples brushed against the side of her cheeks. She continued, Libei may have revolted, but the Libei armored cavalry is still Chu capital's impenetrable fortress in the northeast. The Prince of Libei died in battle and the battle zone has yet to receive reports of success this year. The fight is indeed tough. You people are far away in Chu capital and have limited knowledge of the Biancha 12 tribes. Just a few military reports are not enough to fully depict the scale of Amuer's ambitions. Don't keep thinking that they really can't breach the defenses and invade. Chu capital was the capital of the Son of Heaven, the culmination of Great Zhou's 100 years of golden age. Unlike the worn and weary frontiers, it had never been under attack. Only 7 years had passed since the military defeat of Zongbo, yet there were no longer any signs of the panic that had been prevalent at that time in Chu capital. Here, the fear of the Biancha cavalry had long faded. Amuer has already taken command of the 6 tribes, and he's imitating Great Zhou's military farming system, in which the stationed garrison troops carried out farming duties, in Guidal. If Qidong doesn't deploy troops this year, Chu capital will no longer be able to detach themselves from the matter. I'll be frank. My soldiers can't outrun the Biancha cavalry. If Libei falls and Loxia Pass can't hold up, then even if the Biancha cavalry slaughters their way into Chu capital, I won't be able to hurry over in time. The wind intensified. Qi Zuyan stood still and turned to look at Xue Zaiozhuo. Towering behind her were the vermilion walls with its stacked tiers of upturned eaves soaring into the clear sky. There was not even a cloud overhead. It was in this way that Chu capital lay bare and exposed to the first light of the day. I must mobilize the troops. There was no joy in Qi Zuyan's eyes. Qidong rarely participated in Chu capital's political affairs. Qi Xiu was smart. Whether it was in handling Qidong's relationship with Libai, or maintaining Qidong's amity with the noble clans, he could always find the most appropriate time to pick sides. But not so for Qi Zuyan. She did not possess the kind of patience that Qi Xiu had. She would rather risk being dismissed and prosecuted by Chu capital to attack the Qingsha tribe, because she knew that the war situation was far more pressing than the political situation. The trap in which the Empress Dowager set to coerce Xue Xiaozuo into giving in was brilliant, but she also coerced Qi Zuyan to get married with Fei Shi, which meant that she would not be giving Qi Zuyan any noble rank. In fact, she had even shown signs of wanting to split up the military power in Qi Zuyan's hands. Perhaps there were indeed people who were more capable of fighting wars than Qi Zuyan was. However, at this time and at this moment when the battlefields in the north and south were at stake, Qi Zuyan would never hand over Qidong's military power to anyone else but herself. Since the Empress Dowager already had the thought of moving her, she would never sit still and resign herself to her fate. As long as the memorial to mobilize troops can be approved and the deployment order from the Ministry of War can be issued before I leave, Qi Zuyan suddenly smiled, then the military provisions that are keeping you at a standstill isn't hard to deal with. I won't forcibly make a requisition for Juexi's food. Xue Xiaozuo brushed aside the willow branch that came flying towards him and said, "It's a deal." *******. The incense in the hall was a bit too strong, and it made Hua Xiangji feel sick after smelling it for a long time. Madame Liu Xiang hurriedly had the maids open the windows. She helped Hua Xiangji sit on the couch near the window and said ardently, "Third young miss has left for only half a year and this humble slave can see how much thinner you have become. That Qidong lies close to the desert. It has been hard on the third young miss." Hua Xiangji clutched her handkerchief and said, "Auntie is the one who has lost weight." She turned her eyes to look at the small prayer hall in the inner chamber. Madame Liu Xiang said, "Her Majesty misses the third young miss, and she prays to the Bodhisattva every day to ask for blessings for the third young miss. Last time, she caught a cold in the night and wanted to see the third young miss. Taking medicine didn't work either, so she had this humble slave lit the lamp to read the letters that the third young miss sent." They were in the midst of conversing when the eunuch outside gave a shout to announce the arrival of the Empress Dowager. Hua Xiangji walked over to greet the Empress Dowager, but the Empress Dowager dispensed with the formalities and held her hands as she stood at the doorway to look Hua Xiangji over carefully. "Why have you lost weight? Are you not used to the food in the Qi's residence? I picked a few chefs from our city for you. Take them with you when you leave." The Empress Dowager grew so emotional as she spoke that her eyes indistinctly glistened with tears. She stroked Hua Xiangji's temple. "Is my baby girl all well?" Hua Xiangji held the Empress Dowager's hands back and choked slightly with sobs as she answered, "I've been missing my aunt." The Empress Dowager led her inside, her heart breaking upon hearing her. She would not let Hua Xiangji sit at the side when she took her seat on the couch, instead insisting on having her sit next to her. "Does that Qi Xiu treat you well? What about Qi Zuyan? I heard that those concubines of his are a restless lot who don't know their places. If anyone dares to affront you, get the maidservants to tie them up and send them away. I'll back you up." Hua Xiangji broke into a smile through her tears. The Empress Dowager hugged her like a child and said, "I used to think that I could still send letters when you marry over. Only now did I learn how it feels to be so far apart." The Empress Dowager originally wanted to pick the best husband for Hua Xiangji, but never in her wildest dreams would she have expected Hua Xiangji to be eventually married away to Qi Xiu. To the Empress Dowager's mind, Qi Xiu had at least been a hero for a lifetime, and except for his age, he could be begrudgingly said to be worthy of Hua Xiangji. But who knew he would suffer a stroke in the end? The Empress Dowager regretted making this move and wished with all her heart to give all that was good to Hua Xiangji as she faced her now. Hua Xiangji leaned against the Empress Dowager and asked once the latter was done reminiscing, Is auntie all well? The principal hall is in such a mess that I can't eat or sleep well. The Empress Dowager paused for a moment before continuing self-derisively. I'm old, after all. My mind and spirits are not as they were before. Hua Xianji slowly straightened up a little and said in a gentle voice, why do you have to go so far as to work so hard? There's the Grand Secretary to assist in state affairs. I heard that the heir apparent is a keen learner, too. The Empress Dowager supported Emperor Xiand, so she could also support the heir apparent now. In Hua Xianji's opinion, Li Jianting was far more reliable than the previous two emperors. Although she was physically in Qidong, she was very well aware of all the major happenings in Chu capital. The Empress Dowager gave a long sigh. She recalled the way Li Jianting looked earlier when she spoke up in Mingli Hall and felt even more on guard against the heir apparent. You are looking at it too superficially. How is that heir apparent easy to get along with? She's merely a cheap, lowly lass from out there whom a few scoundrels instigated to challenge me. After a moment of silence, Hua Xianji said, having married over to Qidong, I have some understanding of Biancha and Zongbo. Auntie, Shen Zequan is now in power in Zongbo, but he isn't bad by nature. Reclaiming Duan province and drawing up the fields again are all good things. I asked Zayu last year how the situation in the Dan city was, and she said Pan Yi couldn't say for sure either. Too many people have died of starvation. The pair of them had the thought to provide aid relief to the refugees, but with the granaries empty of grains, there was nothing they could do either. The Empress Dowager gradually shut her eyes. After listening for a while, she said, I know you have a kind heart, but this is the moment that decides whether we succeed or fail. The Empress Dowager opened her eyes once again and looked at Hua Xianji. You lived in the palace away from this city, and there are things you don't know. Our family properties were confiscated during the reign of Xiand, and I was stranded and trapped in the inner courtyard. During those periods, even the eunuchs of the inner court's yamen dared to come before my palace and blackmail me for silver. There are many who were waiting to humiliate and trample over us had the Marquis of Helion not bribed them. Look at that Shueklan. The legitimate son of lawful birth is a good-for-nothing who squandered away all his family properties and is now being bullied around. Where are his nobleman's dignity and respectability? Then look again at that Shui Yanking. He's the most bastard of all bastards. His desire to audit Dan City's field taxes means he wants to use us as a stepping stone for the heir apparent. How many of those from the 8 cities will be able to escape if we were to be investigated by him for real? The Empress Dowager straightened up in her seat too. Without the noble clans, what else can I use to vie with them? If there's a problem with the field taxes, I will square the accounts myself in the future. No one else has the prerogative to interfere. And that Shen Zequan, acting in cahoots with Xiao Qi yet. I can tell what they are thinking of doing. You think he's looking at the land under his feet, but he's clearly eyeing the throne. Traitors of such ilk seek fame in everything they do. Shen Wei's treachery is still hanging over his head. The words Hua Xianji said were already tactful. She watched as the Empress Dowager's chest heaved and knew that the Empress Dowager's mind was already made up. She would never be willing to coexist with the heir apparent. Hua Xianji made as if to speak but stopped as she heard the sudden sound of rain starting up outside. To her surprise, a sun shower had started to fall. End chapter. Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 3, Drunk in Wild Songs. Chapter 224, Abrupt Change. The sun shower stopped as abruptly as it came. Liang Qiushan's swiftly moving boots were covered in specks of mud. He lifted the hem of his robe and strode through the door, where the officials waiting in the office of the Ministry of Revenue were already all ready to go. He listened as the sound of the rain outside came to a sudden stop and took out his handkerchief to wipe away the thin film of sweat on his face. Succinctly, he announced, "Start the count." The sounds of abacus beads being flicked noisily in the room started up, as if the sudden rain earlier had begun to fall again inside the office. Carrying the Grand Secretariat's order in his bosom, Liang Qiushan sat on the Taishi chair and reopened those 8 cities account books that had been stacked up into a pile and buried his head in them to do his recalculations. His mental arithmetic was outstanding, and he understood how taxes worked, so he was pretty fast going through the accounts. But to be on the safe side, he still had an abacus, brushes, and paper prepared within hand reach. The proverbial rain in the Ministry of Revenue's office fell throughout the night. Only errand runners went in and out during this time to brew strong tea for the various gentlemen to keep their spirits up. In the midst of this din, however, the Empress Dowager did not sleep a wink. Smoke from burning incense inside her palace spiraled upwards. The Empress Dowager turned the prayer beads in her hand as she reclined on the couch, while Madame Qiang pounded her legs in a massage. There was no one else inside this hall. The Empress Dowager, having already removed her eastern pearls, looked rather haggard as she shut her eyes for a nap. Commander Han has already communicated with Fu Man. Madame Qiang reassured her in a soft voice. There should be movements on the heir apparent's end by now. The Empress Dowager opened her eyes slightly. The heir apparent interjected in while we were discussing affairs in Mingli Hall today. I can see that Kong Baran has a change of heart towards her. He really thinks of her as a student now. Isn't this all instigated by Shui Yanking? Madame Qiang massaged with rhythmic finesse. She was raised outside the palace. How would she understand political affairs? She doesn't know when to stop pushing it, and she has no sense of propriety. Even if she wants to interfere in the affairs of the state, she has to have the capability to. Qi Ziyuan's reluctance to accede to me today must be because she thinks Shui Zhuo still has a way out. Since they are so anxious to do account of the 8 cities' surplus grains, the Empress Dowager scrutinized her hand that had the prayer beads wound around it. Then, by all means, go ahead. Under the slightly dimmed lights, the Empress Dowager appeared calm and unruffled, without so much as a semblance of panic. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The more Liang Qiushan did his calculations, the more alarmed he was. He maneuvered the abacus several times under the noisy sound of its beads being flicked, but the result was the same as his mental calculations. There was no problem with the reserves of the Dan city's granaries that the Ministry of Revenue was rechecking. According to the calculations of the quantity of these surplus grains, the granaries in the 8 cities were now Great Zhou's most abundant granaries. How could that be? Liang Qiushan pushed away the abacus and stood up, once again wiping the sweat from his face with his handkerchief. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Pan Lin sat back in his chair, his face pale under the candlelight. He had been locked up here for several days. If nothing else, the creased corners of his robe only served to show just how wretched a side he cut for a young master of a noble clan. He pushed himself to hang on and looked at Shui Zhuo with tired eyes. You knew the detailed situation of the 8 cities' granaries when you audited their field taxes at the start of the year. Shui Zhuo was tired, too. He covered his eyes with a damp handkerchief for a moment to gather himself. The granaries of the 8 cities have long been emptied, am I right? Pan Lin answered with silence. Chenzi, Shui Zhuo switched over to calling Pan Lin by his courtesy name. You let Yao Yuanzhou go because you are still kind at heart. You are not of the same kind as Wei Guo, so why work for them against your conscience? So many people starved to death in Dan City last year. If the imperial court is unable to resurvey the fields and return them to the commoners, many more people will die of starvation in Dan City next year. The jut in Pan Lin's throat bobbed. He tilted back his head a little and stared at the pitch-dark roof. Qi Ziyuan made repeated trips into the capital to ask for the military salaries, and even at this time, the Qidong garrison troops still have no way of dispatching their troops. The Bianxia 12 tribes have already fought their way to the Bianjun commandery. Shui Zhuo's bloodshot eyes from the lack of sleep revealed his struggle, as if he was being tormented. He continued, Chenzi, I need grains. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A moth flew out of nowhere and rested on the window. In the long, endless silence, it took flight once more and lunged into the night. It wandered in the dark, brushing past a speeding horse carriage that came to a stop before a residence. Hua Xiangji leaped off the carriage just as Hong Ying lifted the carriage curtain. "Madam!" Hua Xiangji lifted the hem of her skirt and broke into a run after striding through the main gate. The pearls that adorned the hairpin in her hair swung violently as she ran. Gasping for breath, she passed through the labyrinthine front courtyard and long walkways, ignoring the startled shouts around her as she ran into Qizuyan's courtyard. Qi Wei was talking to the attendants when he suddenly saw Hua Xiangji running over. Startled and thinking that there was an assassin, he promptly shouted, "Protect the commander-in-chief." In a split second, the guards in the courtyard drew their blades, their glints mutually standing out in sharp relief with Hua Xiangji's swaying pearls, masking the cold frost of the moon. Pearls strewed over Qizuyan the moment she opened the door. Hua Xiangji hastily held up the hair at her temple, which was already covered in a thin sheen of sweat amidst her slightly urgent breathing. The Dan city's granaries are empty. No matter how much surplus grains the Ministry of Revenue comes up with in their rechecks, Hua Xiangji was still clutching her skirt as she looked at Qizuyan. "They are all a smoke screen." Qizuyan returned the hairpin she had caught to Hua Xiangji and looked at Qi Wei. Qi Wei immediately stepped back, turned around to hurry out of the courtyard, and sent someone to relay the information to Liang Qiushan. At this time, it was nearing the third quarter of the hour of Zhou. At the second quarter of the hour of Yin, the various imperial court officials had to be ready to wait outside the palace gates. They would then enter the palace for the morning court session exactly at the hour of Mao. Time was of pressing urgency, and no one dared to tarry. Pan Lin fell completely silent after Xue Xiaozuo said his piece. He was a man well versed in the Confucian classics, and he could not bring himself to look directly into Xue Xiaozuo's eyes. He gazed at the roof and saw the time-worn traces of years of disrepair on the beams. The parts that had not been covered by the new paint lay exposed outside, its exterior dotted with fine insect holes, rotten to the core. It was in here that Pan Lin sat, yet he felt the wind as he silently counted those small holes, killing himself with a blunt blade in that silence. He understood that Xue Xiaozuo's expression might be just a disguise, and yet he also knew that what Xue Xiaozuo had said was the truth. In all these days he had been in his prison cell, his silence had not been all about avoidance. "Let me ask you." Pan Lin was slow to react as he turned his head around and finally willing to look Xue Xiaozuo in the eyes. "Why do you want to kill Yuan Zhou?" Xue Xiaozuo leaned back in his chair and similarly looked at Pan Lin in the eyes, too. "You want to assist the Li clan, and so did the Secretariat Elder Hai. Both of you supported Emperor Tianchen and replaced Hua Saiqian." Pan Lin shifted his shackled hand onto the table. "But then, you killed Emperor Tianchen for the heir apparent. Shui Yanqing, you hide under the waves. I can't tell if you are a loyal sage or a treacherous sycophant at all." Pan Lin needed an answer. With this question, Xue Xiaozuo could clear up the unbecoming part of him that went against the principles of the virtuous gentleman. He only needed to give Pan Lin a justifiable reason and he would have won a landslide victory tonight. But Xue Xiaozuo said, "I want to kill Yao Yuanzhou because he deserved to be killed." He no longer looked as prim and proper after having stayed up all night. In fact, he was even willing to loosen up his tightly fastened official robe as he sat across the table. The noble clans are always thinking that they still dominate this imperial court. However, they had already long lost control of this carriage towards the end of the reign of Yanji. Look at your father. If the noble clans had been tough and fearsome enough, would he have needed to be in two minds under the pincer attacks of both the noble clans and those of humble origins? The Zongbo's military defeat during the reign of Xian made me understand one thing. Xue Xiaozuo lifted a finger and pointed to the ground. At the same time that the noble clan is infiltrating Great Zhou, they are also being infiltrated by others. Hua Saiqian thought he could outplay Amuer in the east, but in truth, he was just a jackal that Amuer trapped while spying on Great Zhou. The most ludicrous thing was that even right up until his death, Hua Saiqian thought he was the one holding the chain. Secretariat Elder Hai and I watched the Prince of Libei rise to power. The Libei armored cavalry became a valiant army in the northeast, but they did not place themselves at the Li clan's disposal. Their surnames were Xiao. No matter how loyal Xiao Fangxiu and Xiao Jiming were, the Libei armored cavalry no longer accepted commanding generals from Chu capital. They call themselves a pack of wolves and even term themselves an iron wall. That's right, they are indeed an impenetrable fortress, but at the same time that they block out the Bianchi cavalry, they also block Chu capital. Had the Empress Dowager not undermined and corrupted state politics, Emperor Guangchen would have long gotten the Libei armored cavalry to disperse during the later period of the reign of Yanji. It was when they were still called the Loxia cavalry that they were truly subordinated to the Li clan's army. Would Xiao Fangxiu not really understand that? Even so, he was still unwilling to hand over his military power. He believed in himself. He might not have been wrong, but he couldn't control the gradually solidifying armored cavalry. Many people denounced Chu capital for being paranoid, but who could guarantee that such a large and powerful army would keep on having a clear-headed commander-in-chief for eternity? Even Xiao Fangxiu himself knew it was impossible. What is needed to be sitting here is not verbal promises or personal trust, but a real balance and control of power. Xiao Fangxiu had long understood that he would have to hand over a son to Chu capital, and Secretariat Elder Hai looked for an appropriate opportunity for him to do so in consideration of Libei's friendship and dignity. But before he could act, Hua Saiqian, in a bid to make up for the state treasury deficit, handed the 6 prefectures of Zongbo over on a silver platter to Amuer. As a result, the reason for Xiao Qiye's entry into the capital became Chu capital and Libei's sore point. Do you understand now? There are scorpions from the desert in these waters. Amuer relied on them to stir up the situation and make Great Zhou rot from within. Yet the noble clans feigned ignorance about it. Secretariat Elder Hai and I went through a lot of trouble to support Li Jianheng to ascend to the throne in the hope that Li Jianheng could clean up and sort out the imperial court, but he turned out to be a good-for-nothing through and through. Yao Yuanzuo's reputation has been built up to a terrifying level, but he would never put it to use for Chu capital. If I don't kill him, he will inevitably be used by others. All of you kept Yuan Zhou alive for the sake of the so-called cardinal principles of righteousness. You can now see for yourself the surge of scholars with a literary reputation in the world flocking towards Zongbo, where he is now giving counsel to Shen Zequan. Shueziaozuo paused for a long time before he continued expressionlessly, I'm neither a loyal sage nor a treacherous sycophant. What exactly was he? He himself did not know. He received Mr. Changzong's guidance during the early years of his education and thought he would be able to become a gentleman of virtue himself. In the past several years, he held Qi Huilian in high esteem and even had exchanges with him before. He thought Qi Huilian could understand his aspirations, but the latter rejected him. He respected Hai Lianji and was willing to put himself at the latter's beck and call. To this day, he still wanted to address Hai Lianji as his teacher. However, Hai Lianji staunchly believed that Li Jianheng could become emperor under his guidance, and Shueziaozuo could wait no longer. He wanted to install on the throne a sovereign that could create a new world. If there was no such candidate, he could only press on and go all out. He did not need compassion, nor did he need to justify himself. He was willing to pay an exponential price for all that he had done. He had only one life, and he gambled it on Great Zhou's twilight years. Whether or not the dawn that broke after the night was the one that he sought, he was still willing to risk his life to pursue it with all his might. This was Great Zhou's last chance, as well as his own. Pan Lin raised both his hands to cover his face before the table. After a long time, he spoke up. I was already aware that Wei Huigo was falsifying accounts when I served as the vice minister in the Ministry of Revenue. I also knew that there was something wrong with the field taxes in Dan City. He revealed his eyes that were lined with fine wrinkles. But my name is Pan Lin, and I can only. Pan Lin did not continue. He rubbed his face hard a few times. Hurried footsteps rang out from outside the prison cell. Pan Lin and Xue Xiaozuo sat in silence, listening as that noise pressed in towards them. At the very last moment the door opened. Empty. Pan Lin said wearily. The 8 cities' granaries are all empty. Xue Xiaozuo sprang to his feet. Before the general staff could open his mouth, Xue Xiaozuo made a clean sweep of his fatigue and fastened back his collar, then gave a slight nod at Pan Lin and said, "Thank you." Shadows moved around outside the prison cell. Just as Xue Xiaozuo was about to leave, Pan Lin suddenly spoke up, "You subdued your selfish desires to such an uncompromising extent that you are already beyond what the average person can tolerate. As you said it yourself, what is needed here is checks and balances, and what do you have that could let the heir apparent hold you in check?" Xue Xiaozuo looked askance at him and did not answer. Pan Lin seemed to have understood something. He watched Xue Xiaozuo leave. The door to the prison cell closed with a creak, leaving only him sitting alone in there. Thin ray of morning light peeked through the small window at the side, but did not shine on Pan Lin. Pan Lin had already done his best. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Pan Xiangzhi rummaged through his chests and cupboards in a search of the account books. Those old account books that had accumulated at the bottom of the chests were all sharp weapons that could bring about his downfall. He had heard the news when he woke up, and he had to burn all the incriminating evidence before Xue Xiaozuo made his way here. The reign of Yanji. The reign of Xiand. The reign of Tianchen. Pan Xiangzhi bundled up all of these accounts neatly. He kneeled before the chests and untied the rope with his bare hands before throwing all the account books into the copper basin. There were too many of them for him to burn it all on his own. Pan Xiangzhi's panic was giving him a stomachache. He would never have imagined that his son would give things away. He had already been driven to a dead end, he could not leave the matter at that. The reign of Yanji. Pan Xiangzhi traced the entries in the accounts with his finger and read them out. The Hua clan. The Han clan. Everyone is in here. Pan Xiangzhi was wild with joy. As long as everyone was in here, his Pan clan would not perish. The sound of running military boots suddenly erupted from the courtyard. Pan Xiangzhi clutched the account book tightly and rose to his feet using a chest as a support. Unsteadily, he made his way to the door. But the one who came was Han Cheng. Faking composure, Pan Xiangzhi covered the book with his wide sleeves and said to Han Cheng, "Things have not come to a head yet, and already the Empress Dowager can't contain herself. Abandoning the pawn to protect the rook is absolutely not the wisest strategy. Xue Xiaozuo and the noble clans are on antagonistic terms. Even if you cut off my Pan clan today, the others will not be able to escape unscathed either." Pan Xiangzhi had spent a lifetime pretending to be a senile, old duffer who cowered behind Hua Saiqian and Wei Huigu, and fell to his knees at every turn to beg for mercy in the imperial court, yet here he stood today, speaking with lucidity and eloquence. Han Cheng gripped the hilt of his blade. "Your execution now gives everyone some room to catch their breaths. Who would dare to disregard your kindness? I guarantee your legitimate line of descendants will not die. They will still have an opportunity to stage a comeback one day." As Pan Xiangzhi watched the glint of the blade pressed in towards him, he could not help but raise his voice, "Kill me today, and you'd be merely forcing Xue Xiaozuo's hand. Once Dan City is gone, how much longer can Chuan City last? Cut the crap." Sweat had also broken out on Han Cheng's forehead. He waved a hand to give the order. "The Empress Dowager has long known that you would leave a way out for yourself. These accounts are in such a mess, and yet you can still remember them so clearly. Burn this courtyard down." Pan Xiangzhi held onto the door and saw his family members wailing. In that mayhem, he hollered out, "I've long gotten Chenzi to transcribe these accounts. Go ahead and burn them. Even if you kill me now, these accounts will still fall into Xue Xiaozuo's hands." Pan Lin's treason is already an established fact. Han Cheng drew his blade out. Didn't he secretly let Yao Wenyu go? Yao Wenyu is now Shen Zequan's strategist. The evidence proving your Pan clan's collusion with the rebels is conclusive. So how credible can his words be? He is the spy that Shen Zequan left in Chu capital. Caught in the thick of the pushing and shoving, Pan Xiongja fell to the ground. He shouted out, "You cast aside your pawns once they have served their purpose, and you eliminate them once they outlived their usefulness. Like cooking the hounds for food once the hares have been hunted and casting aside the bows once the birds have been shot down. I was a willing lackey for you people, yet this is how it ends today. Han Cheng, even if I die today, how much longer can you live?" Being on duty with his 8 Great Training Division's authority token with him, Han Cheng could wait no longer. He walked towards Pan Xiongja as the fire blazed and raised his blade for the kill. Unexpectedly, Qi Wei, who was behind him, was even faster. Instead of going around the walkway, he leaped over the ridge of the roof and swooped down from above to knock over Han Cheng, sending the latter tumbling along with him. Pan Xiongja took this opportunity to suddenly raise the account book and yell towards the courtyard entrance. "Commander-in-Chief Qi, save me." In the thick of the scuffle, Han Cheng tossed out the 8 Great Training Division's authority token and shouted as well, "The capital troops hold the most authority at the foot where the Son of Heaven is. Qi Zuyan's troops shall go no further than the outskirts of the city. How dare you obstruct my 8 Great Training Divisions from carrying out its duties? I ask Commander-in-Chief Qi to arrest the criminal minister. I possess both the warrant of arrest from the Ministry of Justice and the deployment order from the Ministry of War. So why wouldn't I dare to?" Shueziaozuo flicked aside the hem of his robe and barked in a stern voice, "Put out the fire and arrest him. Take Han Cheng in as well." Han Cheng said, "I am here on the Empress Dowager's decree. You dare to arrest me?" The 8 Great Training Division soldiers in the courtyard instantly drew their blades and took a threatening step towards Shueziaozuo. Qi Zuyan pushed the blades aside with the sheath of her blade and said from the back, "Since the 8 Great Training Divisions are troops of the capital, they are the Son of Heaven's army. The heir apparent has asked me to assist in the case, yet you're electing to obey the Empress Dowager instead." Han Cheng had initially thought Pan Xiongja was bluffing him. Who would have expected Qi Zuyan to really show up? The reason he dared to kill Pan Xiongja before Shueziaozuo showed up was that he had the 8 Great Training Divisions in his hands and could use it to strong-arm the Grand Secretariat. But with Qi Zuyan's troops presently stationed right outside the city, he would no doubt be on the losing end if a fight was to break out. Han Cheng's arrogance deflated some, and he hissed through clenched teeth, "Of course, I shall do as the heir apparent says." The 8 Great Training Divisions returned their blades to their sheaths and watched Qi Zuyan's guards enter to detain Pan Xiongja and Han Cheng. That fire did not burn for too long before it was easily extinguished. Shueziaozuo waved away the smoke and dust and picked up a few of the account books that had not been fully burned. *******. The Empress Dowager was taken aback by the unforeseen developments. On hearing that Shueziaozuo had taken the account books away, she could not help but collapse onto the couch. A deep furrow materialized between her eyebrows as she spitefully lamented, "Pan Xiongja, that scoundrel. In order to save his own life, Pan Xiongja had dragged everyone down into hot water. Where is the heir apparent?" The Empress Dowager regained her composure. "Well, then. Shueziaozuo certainly is capable. Since he wishes to fight me to the death, then let him find out for himself if the destined Son of Heaven in his hands is tough enough." As the Empress Dowager spoke, she jerked the prayer beads off her hand and threw them into the burning copper basin, sending up countless splutters of soot. After his capture, Han Cheng shut his eyes and went to sleep with his face to the wall. He ignored everyone else as he was sure that Shueziaozuo would not dare to touch him yet. Pan Xiongja reverted to his previous ways, clutching onto his sleeves as he sat sobbing on the other side of the table. Yes. I'll account for it all, Pan Xiangja wiped his tears, but let me have a bite first. Yanking, I'm starving. This cunning old fellow meant to stall for time by using the account books to blackmail the Empress Dowager and wait for her to rescue him. Although Liang Qiushan was in charge of taxation, he had also seen such trials before and was aware that these old fellows were not easy to interrogate and put on trial. Having stayed up all night, he took 2 sips of the strong tea and said after receiving Shui Ziaozuo's implied consent, "It also takes time for a meal to be prepared. Your Venerable Excellency can take your time to speak." Pan Xiangja glanced at Liang Qiushan, who did not appear to be angry. "Chongshen, you are on such good terms with Jinzi, so you know me." He stroked his belly and pulled a long face. "I'm unaccustomed to going hungry at home, so my mind is currently in a mess. How would I dare to put your Venerable Excellency to the trouble?" Liang Qiushan set his tea aside. "All you have to do is answer me. I audited the surplus grains in Dan City yesterday and discovered that the granary was full. Tell me, did you purchase grains from elsewhere to pass them off as the surplus grains just before the Ministry of Revenue's rechecks? Look, I don't manage the grains." Pan Xiangja innocently spread his hands apart. He seemed to be panicking. "I'm in charge of the Ministry of Works. For the details regarding these grains, you'll have to ask the tax circuit intendant of Dan City, or Pan Yi. I asked them long ago." Liang Qiushan flipped open the account book and showed it to Pan Xiangja. "They've all confessed. You people sold the grains to Yan Hiru. Since Dan City sold its stock, the other 7 cities must have too, right? I'm not even sure about the Dan City accounts, so how would I know about the other 7 cities?" Pan Xiangja knew that this information was likely brought up by Liang Qiushan to trick him. Since they've already confessed to it, Yanking, go by the books. Report it to the Grand Secretariat and have the Senior Grand Secretary take a look, too. Shui Ziaozuo said, "Given that we have to discuss it during the morning court session, it was already reported before the hour of Mao." For a moment, Pan Xiangja could not tell whether Shui Ziaozuo was telling the truth or not when he heard that it was already reported. Liang Qiushan fished out the order from his sleeve. "Otherwise, how could we have managed to request your presence here? We naturally followed the procedures in accordance with the constitution of the law. The Ministry of Justice has already given their authorization." Pan Xiangja stared at the document for a long time. Shui Ziaozuo leaned in closer and looked at Pan Xiangja as he said, "Your Excellency is in charge of the administration of the Ministry of Works. I noticed that the dams of Kaling River were well repaired when the public ditches case happened during the reign of Xiand. This shows that Your Excellency is a practical man who does concrete work and is willing to share the burdens of the common people. My target this time isn't Your Excellency. Jinzi is fine. It has not come to the point where he needs to be executed. There's only a little blip on the Pan clan's accounts. You'll still have some leeway left after we sort this out." These words were telling Pan Xiangja that if he continued to remain indecisive, then even this bit of leeway would be gone. Pan Xiangja let out a few sobs, his beard drooping as he said to Shui Ziaozuo, "I really am not sure." Shui Ziaozuo said, "Then it appears that Dan City is the private city of the Pan clan. You deceived the imperial court and colluded with Pan Lin from the Ministry of Revenue to appropriate the commoners' crop fields in Dan City and falsely report the field taxes. You also resold public grains and conspired with the wealthy merchant Yan Hiru of He Province, leading to the deaths of countless of citizens. Your Pan clan is solely culpable for all of this." Listening to him filled Pan Xiangja with fear and trepidation. Realizing that Shui Ziaozuo was being serious, he hastened to call out, "Yanking. The account books and the confession statements have all been transcribed verbatim and submitted to the Grand Secretariat." Shui Ziaozuo ignored Pan Xiangja. "Corrupted men like you who pervert the course of justice deserve to have your family properties confiscated to make up for what you owe in taxes and your entire family executed. The account books have not been straightened out yet." Pan Xiangja followed suit and stood up. Both his hands were trembling as he pleaded. Yanking, yanking. We can discuss this over. I haven't given my statement yet. Xue Xiaozuo turned back. Pan Xiangji could only say, these accounts. The prison door behind Xue Xiaozuo suddenly opened, and the clerk, not knowing what had happened, stood up in response. Xue Xiaozuo looked back and could not help but break out in a cold sweat when he saw that it was a eunuch from the palace. This out-of-breath young eunuch did not dare to look at an imperial court minister in the eyes as he kneeled on the ground and hurriedly shuffled forth on his knees a few steps before saying in a fluster, Your Excellency. The heir apparent suddenly fainted before the court session was to start. The senior grand secretary has urgently summoned the imperial physician over. At this moment. Just one step away. Xue Xiaozuo's limbs were icy cold, and the hand in which he was clenching the book broke out in a cold sweat. Pan Xiangji instantly shut his mouth and sat back. Strikes where it hurts. The Empress Dowager was truly one tough opponent. Xue Xiaozuo dropped the account book in his hands and squeezed the words out through clenched teeth, set off for the palace. End chapter. Notes. 1 hour of Zhou is 1 to 3 a.m. 2 hour of Yin is 3 to 5 a.m. 3 hour of Mao is 5 to 7 a.m.